Well, here we are again, still in Lecture 12. It's a long one. This was supposed to be part of 8. I realized it was running too long. I had to go back and chop it in half, so now it's 8b. So, sorry if this last few have been a little jerky. I'm still learning a lot about how this whole thing operates. But getting a little smarter as I go, I think. So, we're going to jump back through some slides. We were in the middle of a slide when I had to cut the time back, and so we'll see some repeated artwork here. So I've already told you about FDR's position on the war in Europe. He thinks Hitler and Germany is a threat. I've already told you how he's going to start working on shifting U.S. mindset towards maybe thinking about having to get involved in this thing at some point. And I told you about how the Neutrality Act of 37 was modified in 1939 to allow us to sell weapons to Great Britain and France, and basically to certain countries. But those are the countries that Roosevelt has in mind right off the top of the bat. Okay. And that's kind of where I ran out of time. I needed a map, and so I stopped the video, went to get the map, realized that the video was going to be too long that way, and so that's why we have this awkward transitional repetitive part here. So we're going to jump forward to the map, and then we'll come back to this outline. Okay, map, Germans and Trush. Okay. Well, here's a map. The big map is coming up in a minute. Maybe I could make do of this one. This map should have gone before a picture of the Germans in Paris. But anyway, here's Germany. Here's what's going to happen. Well, let's say I want to go to the big map. Sorry if the artwork got corrupted here. Don't worry about it. We'll come back to all this. There's the map I wanted. All right. Like I said, I redo the PowerPoint. I've got ideas on how to make this all work better. All right. So here, once again, is our map of Europe. We've already seen this. Okay. As I told you, after the fall of Poland in fall of 1939, there's this period where there's not a lot happening in the war. I mean, like I said, there's naval patrols, there's, things are happening, but there's not this major battle stuff going on here. And like I think where I ran out of time right at the end there, I was telling you that in the spring of 1940, after the winter weather clears, the Germans go on a tear. All right, let me get my trusty pen here. Several things happen. Okay, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so don't worry too much about chronological order. Maybe slightly off. But the Germans go into Denmark, which falls just like in hours. Okay. At some point, they invade Norway up here. Okay. But the one that's most important for our purposes is in May. Okay. End of April, early May, the Germans are going to go into France. Now that map that was on the previous screen that I kind of clicked past showed there's fortifications here on the French-German border. What the Germans are going to do is they'll loop through the neutral countries, the Netherlands, if it's where the Dutch are, Belgium, and swing into France that way. Okay. Now, the French army does not do well. Okay? We like to joke about, for sale, French infantry rifle only dropped once. Okay, or we make jokes about cheese-eating surrender monkeys. Or French tank, one reverse, it has one forward gear, 6 reverse gear. But really, none of that's true. We just tell those kind of jokes to annoy the people in the history department who study French history, because we're all pompous and arrogant, right? I've told you that. So we like to irritate them by making fun of the French in World War II. But the French really did fight hard. They did try to defend France. Okay? They lost, gosh, off the top of my head, I think maybe they had like 100,000 casualties. I mean, the French put up a fight. The problem was did not put up an effective fight. The French generals were still thinking in a World War I mindset. Okay, they're not moving fast. First of all, they're elderly, and they're not thinking in terms of the modern speed of the offensive. And they'll set up a defensive or a counteroffensive, and by the time they get everything lined up, the Germans are never 40 kilometers down the road. Okay? And the next thing you know, within a matter of weeks, the Germans are in Paris. Okay? They capture Paris, which of course usually that means when you capture the capital, it's the end of the war. And I think we'll see that on that next slide. That we're going to go back to the last slide. Okay. Whoops. Erase my mess here. Alright, so we're back to this slide again. Alright. There's the German troops marching into Paris on what? Look. There's those horses again. Alright. So the Blitzkrieg comes first, but the follow-up troops are on horseback. Okay? But it's a secret. We don't want the other countries to know that. This is the map that should have been before this picture. This is what the Germans did. This big heavy red line here, that is what they call the Maginot Line. Okay? Very heavy series of fortifications, pop-up turrets, embedded machine guns, cannons that are in bunkers, designed to keep the Germans from coming into France. Of course, like I said, the Germans went around. The strongest fortifications came through neutral Belgium. They also took out Holland while they were at it. Okay? They came through the impenetrable Ardennes forest. Okay? Heavily wooded area, narrow roads, lousy place to launch an offensive. Germans came through there. Now, some people make fun of the French for having the fortifications, but they were very expensive. If they could have continued them into this area, they would have had stronger fortifications. But of course, it was very expensive, and they're worried about Germany. Of course, here's what happens: if you build the fortifications, if it forces the Germans to go through Belgium, now you've just gained an ally in the war, because the Belgian army is going to operate on your side as well. So it's like a force multiplier. So anyway, but the Germans, managed to get to Paris. They tried for 4 years during World War I, couldn't get Paris. Paris falls in late May. The whole thing's over by about halfway through June. Okay, when I say the whole thing, the French capitulate, they surrender about halfway through June, after the fall of Paris. Okay? The British, this movie was out a couple of years ago. It's not on the map here, but somewhere up here on the coast is Dunkirk. Okay, somewhere along here. Okay, and that's where the British Army was trapped and had to be evacuated back to England. So if you saw that movie that was out a couple of years ago, that's where that's going on. This is the time frame it's in. I'd recommend the movie. It has nothing to do with U.S. history. It won't help you with the test. But if you're interested, I thought it was a pretty good flick. All right. So, but this is U.S. history, so let's stay focused on that. So France falls. Great Britain is now alone in the war against Germany. Now, there's a new British Prime Minister. His name's Winston Churchill. Neville Chamberlain's government has fallen because of the debacle in Norway, where the British had tried to interfere in the invasion, and we don't need to go into that. But Winston Churchill arrives on the scene just as the French are capitulating. Okay? And so now Great Britain stands alone. Okay? Now, here's where history takes maybe a different turn. There were people who could have become prime minister who favored maybe negotiating with Hitler, not necessarily because they liked Hitler, but they felt that the time to negotiate was while you still had a position of strength and you had some cards to play. Okay? Churchill had none of it. He basically flips Hitler the bird, if you pardon my French, and says, screw you, this isn't over yet. We're going to keep fighting until the bitter end. Okay? But that's British history. Let's go back to what Roosevelt's got to do here. Let me erase my little squiggly lines here, because otherwise they show up again. Okay. So one of the things Roosevelt will do, I tell you, he's trying to find ways to help the British. And one of the ways he does is something called the Destroyers for Bases deal. Now, this photo of it has gotten corrupted. I need to replace it if I can find it again, or just take it out entirely. But trust me, what this photo is a row of World War I surplus destroyers. Now, for World War I, we had started this mass production of destroyers. Now, destroyers are the smallest Navy ship that operates at sea with the fleet. Okay, smaller guns, less armor, a little bit faster. Their job is basically to protect battleships and cruisers from submarine attack. They're the smallest, like I said, the smallest ocean-going combatant, really. Okay, and we had built a whole bunch of these things for World War I, and then tragically the war ended, and here we are with all these destroyers we don't need. Okay? And so large numbers of them had been put into long-term storage, okay, as emergency war reserves. Okay? So it's 1940. These things were built in 1917, 1918, so 20, 22 years old. But a lot of them are low mileage. A lot of them had not seen very much use and had been what they call the mothball fleet, put into storage. And but they're perfectly capable. They're not the most modern, but they're perfectly capable of dealing with submarines. And just like World War I, the Germans have put a submarine blockade up around Great Britain to try to stop supplies from coming into Great Britain. And the British have also lost destroyers in the attempt to defend Norway. And so Churchill tells Roosevelt, man, I could really use some destroyers. Okay? And he knows that the Americans have dozens of them in storage. And so as Roosevelt wants to help Churchill in Great Britain. The British aren't really in a position they can afford to just buy a bunch of these things. And so Roosevelt works out something called the Destroyers for Bases deal. The British give us access to some of their naval bases. I think there might have been 6, maybe it was 7. It's not important. Where American ships can go in and refuel or pick up supplies or do maintenance. Okay, I think some of them were in the Caribbean, like maybe Bahamas, Jamaica, down around there somewhere. And what Roosevelt tells the American people, look, he says, this is a defensive measure for the United States. We're giving away destroyers that we're not using anyway. They're older, they're in storage. And in return, we're getting access to bases, to British naval bases. He says this will help our ships maintain themselves or give them places to go for repairs. He's trying to sell this to the public as this is really necessary to American defense. It's really a facade. What he really wants to do is give Great Britain destroyers, but he can't just give United States property away to the British. He has to have some kind of cover story. And so it was probably handy to have the bases. I'm sure we probably utilized the access to them, but that wasn't really the main point of the deal. The main point of the deal was to get reinforcements to Great Britain. They need destroyers. We've got them, and bam, there you go. 50 of these things go to the British. Okay. And 1940 is also a presidential election year. Okay? Now, nobody's ever run for a third term. Remember, Washington wouldn't. Jefferson didn't. Okay? Roosevelt does. He feels this is a very dangerous time in the world. He thinks he's worried about what might happen if somebody else gets into the White House, but maybe they won't respond aggressively enough or promptly enough to the German threat. And so he goes ahead and runs for an unprecedented third term. Okay? His Republican opponent is a guy named Wendell Willkie. Wendell Willkie, who I think was a businessman of all things, but I've never read up really, really deep on Willkie. But Roosevelt will win re-election. Here's the election map. With 54.75% of the popular vote. So he's lost some of the percentages he had in his last win, but it's still a major win. And so now Roosevelt can take a breather. Now he knows he has another term to work on this German problem.